Today on Xtreme 4x4. They're 800-horse monsters tearing up tracks. Today, find out what's under the hood of these beasts when our team assembles their Pro II race motor. Plus, quad meets trophy truck in the latest off-road craze, UTV Cross.
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4. You know, it's often referred to as the heart of the beast. And when you're talking hardcore race engines, like for our CORR Pro II truck, an engine is more than just a power plant. It's a technological marvel, building tons of horsepower and gobs of torque.
The average CORR engine floats around 800 horsepower, and the rules state that it can be no larger than 466 CID. But since this truck is going to be traveling around on the trade show circuit, we chose a slightly detuned version of 434 CID.
Now this is the first all-out race engine we've ever built here at Xtreme, so we're going to take you through it step by step. But the cool thing is a lot of the tips and tricks about putting together a race motor apply to building a regular street motor.
For our engine, we knew we needed some information from some people in the know, so we called up Speedomotive. For over 60 years, these guys have been leaders in innovative stroker engine combinations. And they are one of the first engine builders to build short course specific race motors, designed to deliver the maximum horsepower on realistic budgets.
Now for a good engine, we're going to need a great block. So we chose a Dart Iron Eagle cast iron block based on a 351 Windsor. Now it's made of a superior iron alloy, and this one has a 9.5-inch deck height and 1/2-inch blind cylinder bolt holes. So you don't have to worry about coolant wicking up the threads of your head fasteners. But the real news is actually down in the main bearing caps. Number 2, 3, and 4 have what's called splayed bolts, bolts on an angle. Now that helps strengthen up the bottom end of this motor because once they're installed and torqued down, it basically wedges that cap right into place. The splayed bolts provide clamping forces into the block to help contain the side loading of the caps during the crankshaft's rotation. The main journals measure 2.750 inches, and for this engine, we're going to use Cleveite 77 bearings with a light coating of royal purple assembly lube. Then the Eagle 351 crank with a 4-inch stroke is dropped into the block, and the main caps are torqued. The 1/2-inch bolts to 105 foot-pounds. The 7/16 splayed bolts go to 65, and the 3/8 bolts on either end are torqued to 35 foot-pounds. Inside our short block, we're going to be installing some pretty trick parts. Now the crankshaft, along with the rest of the rotating assembly, was all balanced by the guys over at Speedomotive. Now the first thing to bolt onto that crankshaft will obviously be a set of connecting rods. These are Eagle 4340 H-beam connecting rods. They're 6.25 inches in length, and the full floating piston pin measures 0.927 inches across. On top of this connecting rod, obviously are going to go the pistons. For those, we got from CP. They are piston spec for this motor. It's 4.15 inches in bore, 6.5 cc dome, and a 1.25 inch compression height. Obviously on the piston, we're going to need some rings. We got total seal rings for this motor, 2 compression rings, and 1 low tension oil ring. Now obviously all of these parts are super strong, and it's what you want in a full-on race motor. This is not a street and strip motor. But the cool thing is that the technology that's in here, not only do we get strength, we'll actually get more power. You just need to know how. The lightweight pistons allow the engine to reach higher RPMs without the fear of damage. When this engine is spinning at, say, 6,000 RPM, the piston is traveling from the top of the cylinder to the bottom, stopping, and then returning to top dead center 100 times per second. The stronger rods and crankshaft help hold the assembly together. This strength is needed to provide reliability during a race. But the extra horsepower is with the rings. The total seal rings operate without a gap once installed. This allows the rings to have less tension on the cylinder walls without losing compression. This will actually build more power in the engine because of less friction.
For the cam, we chose a comp cam with a 266 intake and a 272 exhaust duration and a 726 lift. Now all of this has to do with building power inside your engine. But what does valve lift, duration, and valve overlap really have to do with power? Well, let's go to the chalkboard.
To understand how the camshaft builds more power in the engine, we have to go right back to basics, back to the 4-stroke cycle. Now the first stroke is the intake stroke, where the piston is traveling down the cylinder with the intake valve open. This causes a low pressure area inside the cylinder, which draws air and fuel past the carburetor into the cylinder itself. Now the second stroke is the compression stroke. Both valves then close, the piston travels back up the cylinder, compressing all the fuel and air that was in the cylinder up into the combustion chamber itself. Now the third stroke is the power stroke. That's where the spark plug ignites, both valves are closed, all the fuel and air compressed in the combustion chamber burns and expands. Since there's nowhere for that expanding gas to go, it forces the piston down and causes the crankshaft to turn. The last stroke is the exhaust stroke. Basically, the piston traveling back up the cylinder with the exhaust valve open sends all the burnt fuel and air out into the exhaust system. Now to make more power in an engine, we have to make it more efficient, burn more fuel and air, and get more fuel and air out. We do that in 3 different ways. First is with valve lift. If a stock engine only allows the valve to open and close so far, with an aftermarket camshaft, we're going to increase that lift and open the valve further, therefore letting more fuel and air in and more exhaust out. Now there is a limit as to how much valve lift we can add before the valve itself will actually start to contact the piston. Now the second is duration, and that's the length of time that that valve is open. Now we have a limitation here because we don't want the valves open too far, at which point they're open together and therefore the engine becomes inefficient. Now the third one is with valve overlap. As the exhaust valve starts to close and the burnt fuel and air is exiting into the exhaust, we'll go ahead and open the intake valve a little bit sooner. That will cause the scavenging effect of the exhaust system that's drawing all that burnt fuel and air out, will actually help pull more new fuel and air into the cylinder to help it burn and therefore make more power. So a camshaft itself can make a huge difference in pretty much any motor. And all we have to do now is put ours in our engine and we'll be ready with the top end.
Coming up, who says desert racing is a rich man's game? These drivers are doing it in a Rhino. UTV Cross, when Xtreme 4x4 continues.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4, where Ian is still in the shop putting together our 434 cubic inch engine that'll eventually go into our CORR Pro II truck. And I know a lot of you guys are thinking, man, I would love to start racing CORR, but I just don't have $500,000 sitting in my pocket. Well, no worries, because there's a new form of racing that pretty much everyone can afford. From motorcycle racing to the exercise boom, what blows up in Southern California becomes huge across the nation. The latest craze in Cali is called UTV Cross. Exciting to race.
It's a blast. It's like being a kid again. It's pretty darn fun.
When Yamaha introduced the Rhino utility vehicle, they never envisioned this.
The hunters would use them, put gun racks on them and all their stuff so they could go out and get in the rough terrain back there. It was all over. People started modifying them, and next thing you know, we're racing them.
Now they're a long way from hunting moose.
It's a cross between a quad and a trophy truck.
Competing on local motocross tracks, the drivers of the mod and stock classes have to endure 15 brutal laps.
Close as you can get to hell. You get out there and push these things to the limit, and you're gonna get hardcore.
Known around the world as the godfather of freestyle motocross, Mike Metzger gives this series his blessing.
Rhino racing's great off-road, good racing.
Over the past year, word about this series has spread quicker than a California wildfire.
We're one of the first 4 cars to race every weekend. Now we're showing up and there's 25 modified Rhinos out here racing.
Tell you what, it's booming right now. It's tremendously huge.
A lifelong racer, Todd Arthur is all about going huge.
You know, I've got a lot of off-road experience in the desert racing, and we had a Rhino that we used for a pit car. We thought, what the heck, we'd come out and try it, and I tell you, I haven't done much desert racing, but I sure have done a lot of Rhino racing.
Dominating the mod class points, Todd wasn't monkeying around when he built the Flying Banana.
Basically started out as a Rhino. You can buy one for about $10,000. And then from there, depending how far you want to go with it, you can dump about another $20,000, $25,000 into it. We're about $35,000 into this.
Racing on tracks littered with double and triple jumps, the suspension was priority one.
Obviously, we've extended the suspension and added some coilover shocks, some Fox shocks, and that really helps us out over the jumps. We're able to achieve about 18 inches of rear wheel travel and about 17 inches of front wheel travel. And we're still using the existing four-wheel drive out of the thing.
He didn't settle for the 30 horses that comes with a Rhino.
We have a modified Rhino 660 motor in it, which is a 686 right now, with some little head porting and carburetor modifications, a few things like that. We probably achieved about an extra 15 horsepower out of it.
Leaving behind hundreds of horses in desert racing, Todd Arthur has no regrets.
I gotta tell you, it's probably the most fun I've had.
Running stock suspension and shocks, some folks prefer their racing old school style.
I like stock ones.
The stock guys, we're a tougher breed.
For stock points leader Jimmy Weitzel, this class isn't about being a tough guy.
There's not on how much money you got, it's all about skill.
In a sport that welcomes newcomers, Jimmy's wife Laura wanted in.
Came out last time he raced and won and watched him and just told him I wanted to race too, and he went out and got me a Rhino, and here I am.
That didn't mean she'd take it easy on her hubby.
If I get a shot to bump him, definitely I'll bump him.
Jimmy had no need to worry as he blew away the field, while Laura ended up in last place.
Thought I'd do a little bit better, but I'll get the hang of it. Hopefully I'll get better and get right up there with my husband.
It doesn't matter where she finishes. To Jimmy, she'll always be his champion.
Well, I'm very proud of her to come out here and to take initiative to want to race with the guys. So I'm very proud of her. She did really good.
Now see girls, who says we can't race? Even though she came in last place, she's still trying. That means you can too. Just go out, buy yourself a Yamaha Rhino. It's easy.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4, where we're right in the middle of putting together this monster 434 cubic inch Ford small block that we're going to be putting in our CORR Pro II race truck. Now so far we have the entire rotating assembly installed in the block, the camshaft is in, and I'm just finishing up the front end with this Weitzel belt drive system. Now Weitzel is the originator of the belt drive, and when it comes to race motors, they're great to have for a couple different reasons. Number one, you can go ahead and advance or retard the cam timing right at the front cover without disassembling the engine. Number two, you can do what's called a hot swap on the camshaft. You can simply pull the camshaft out of the motor without removing this front cover or the oil pan, therefore it's easier to do in the pits. And with this piece on, the short block is basically complete. We can go ahead and start thinking about the oiling system. Now when you're talking about a race motor, you're obviously going to be talking about a dry sump oil system. That means that all the oil for this motor is going to be kept in this storage tank that's kept away from the engine and therefore cooler. But it's also going to allow us to build more power in this motor once again. Simply because all the oil isn't going to be sitting inside the crankcase for the crankshaft to have to cut through. It actually robs power from the motor when that has to happen. Also, the dry sump system creates a vacuum inside the crankcase, which helps suck more fuel and air into the combustion chamber, therefore more power. You do need a specific pan for this type of application, and for our CORR engine, it's from Olson Motorsports. Now this dual kickout pan is made from 090 aluminum with 1/4 inch billet rails and a unique capturing trough for the best oil scavenging. Now a dry sump oil system obviously needs an externally mounted oil pump, and ours is a 5-stage unit from Moroso. It's basically 5 oil pumps stacked in a row, and it's driven off a cogged belt from the crankshaft, and the pressure is controlled by the last stage itself. This will scavenge all the oil from our oil pan as well as from the cylinder head bleed down areas on the block. It'll then deliver pressurized oil to 5 different areas of the engine to keep it lubricated. Now one good idea when you're putting on a a dry sump kit is to make sure to use a screened fitting on the inlet side. That way, if anything ever happens to the motor, engine debris won't end up getting into the oil pump and therefore ruining it. Now this just mounts off the side of the block, and it mounts hand in hand with our Numeroso electric water pump. Now, if the camshaft is responsible for building big power in the short block, the cylinder heads are responsible for the power gains on top of the engine. Now, these are Dart Pro 1 CNC aluminum heads. They have a 62cc combustion chamber, 2.08-inch intake valve, and a 1.6 exhaust. They flow 325 cubic feet per minute through the intake and 235 cubic feet through the exhaust. Basically, the light weight of these heads is going to make our engine lighter, and the design is going to help our small block build big power. Sealing these heads and the rest of our engine will be Fel-Pro Performance Series gaskets and ARP fasteners. To control the valves, we'll be using roller rockers, also from Weitzel, covered with fabricated aluminum valve covers from Summit Racing.
Welcome back to the Xtreme Shop, where Jesse and Ian are buttoning up the top end of their 434 cubic inch race motor.
To ignite spark in our engine, we're going to be using MSD components from start to finish. The Pro Billet distributor will turn our reluctor assembly with a hardened steel shaft for high RPM and a long life of abuse. The MSD6 off-road ignition control box will give us a multiple spark discharge for a 20-degree crankshaft rotation. We'll also be installing a rev control, HVC coil, and MSD ignition wires to round out the whole package.
Now, to finish off the top end of our motor, we're using an Edelbrock Super Victor Jr. 351 aluminum manifold, PC performance carburetor, and spacer combination. Now, the Super Victor manifold is designed for large displacement, high RPM engines, so it'll work great on our 434 stroker. Now, the larger intake runner design allows for more fuel and air to be atomized before it enters the cylinder, and the air gap allows that fuel and air to stay cooler for more power. Now, the PC carburetor starts life as a Holley 4150 unit. It's completely disassembled, blueprinted, a high-flow needle and seat are installed, and all the venturis are polished. Then everything is safety wired together, and this off-road slosh tube is installed to keep fuel from spilling out of the vents and falling into the carburetor itself, and therefore flooding out the motor. Now, this combination is good for up to 950 horsepower, so it should feed our motor no problem at all. Wabba! Wabba! Boom!
Well, there you have it, guys. A complete one-of-a-kind race engine for our Pro II truck. But before it permanently gets dropped in, we're going to take it down to the horsepower, guys, and use our engine dyno to see what kind of numbers we pull at the flywheel.
But obviously, we have a few things to do before then, like the dry sump oil lines. We'll have to do some kind of air cleaner assembly, and then some headers. But we promise we won't pull any girl pulls until you guys are back here with us at Xtreme, so you can see the numbers with us.
Right with us.
I bet 692.
702.
Whoa.
693.